نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. We express our praise and gratitude to Allah Ta'ala. We seek blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once again, thank you to Emaan and Sam and to Mosque Foundation. May Allah Ta'ala reward you for your efforts, for organizing this so frequently, and I appreciate all of you that are here to listen to my remarks. Frankly speaking, I'm not going to be sharing anything you haven't heard already 1,000 times. I mean, if you've attended 10 Jummah khutbahs, 20 Jummah khutbahs, you've probably already heard everything you need to know. But to give you some context, in terms of my own community work, without getting into particulars, I've put myself on a sabbatical over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, continual, until further notice, in large part just because when you're doing community work, as anyone in here who has done community work knows, you get exposed to a lot of the darkness taking place under the rug, behind closed doors, in people's hearts. And that type of darkness is something that can potentially even get into your own heart. And so essentially what I'm sharing here, as I was discussing with Emaan what to talk about, this is my own reflection for my own self as I explore and work to develop my own Emaan. So, the idea being that every one of us is under attack relentlessly, and every one of us is seeking at the same time to be ready when we face Allah Ta'ala. But as we go through, hopefully there'll be a few points that can help any of us in this room recharge our goals, coordinate our goals and such. But this is something that's ultimately, none of the things on the screen are my autobiography, but the whole thing is essentially my autobiography. And so, moving into the actual discussion, one point to think about is that Allah Ta'ala is going to raise us and take us through stages, right? Tabaq and tabaq. And if you look back at your life, you can identify stages in your life. They might be related to academics, preschool or preschool, grade school, junior high, high school, college, beyond college, so forth and so on. It might be related to life events, birth. Maybe at some point you experience some family tragedy or family growth. We have marriage, we have other events in our lives that when we look back, these become our defining moments in our personal narrative. And the question to think about is what happens to your Emaan over the course of this whole process of life. So for example, this is not something to share, but think to yourself, if on a scale of 0 to 100, it is possible to measure your Emaan, and you're being absolutely objective, okay? Meaning you're not elevating yourself, you're not also deflating yourself. Ask yourself what number you'd give yourself right now out of 100. You don't have to raise your hand, and hopefully, no one will blurt it out. We're not going to judge you anyway. But the point is, think of what number you'd give for your Emaan. Now, let's say hypothetically the number is 50 out of 100. Okay? That's the hard part to figure out. Where am I right now? But something that is a step easier is if I ask you compare yourself right now with 1 year ago, with 5 years ago, with 10 years ago. Is where you are right now in better shape than where you were 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years ago? That is something that's probably easier to evaluate. Again, Allah Ta'ala knows best. That you and I know that a person of Emaan, a mu'min, will often think of him or herself as a munafiq, a hypocrite, and a munafiq will often think of him or herself as a mu'min. Okay. But the point is, think of if we were to draw a line between where your Emaan was 5 years ago to today. Is it an increase? Is it stagnant? Is it a decrease? And then why or why not? So, This is the essence of our existence, right? This is an ongoing evaluation for each of us in our self-accounting to figure out where is my Iman. Specifically, in preparation for when I'm going to meet Allah Ta'ala. Now, ideally, sorry I drew this by hand, but ideally, you know, we would say it's a straight line, it just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. Okay. But if we get into more detail, when we look at my actions, my acts of worship, my character, my use of my tongue, then it's kind of hard to see, but it's sort of hidden. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, but hopefully, over the course of my lifetime, it's still an upward move. Okay. But then if we go deeper, something even more subtle, what is taking place in my heart that nobody else can see or hear, you can almost see it, but it's a very, very subtle line, that might be going up and down even more. But the hope is that the overall trajectory is up, right? I think we all agree with this. Simple point. Okay. But I think all of us know that sometimes we reach a moment that we feel like we've lost everything in terms of Iman. Or sometimes we reach a moment where we feel so compelled and so connected to turn to Allah. And so this is a common situation that I have with students. That as they are children, Iman is sort of rising, they go through grade school, junior high school, and then they come to college. And then all the temptations of college start hitting. And they get involved with the wrong circle of friends, and then things start going down. And when you're going down, sometimes you can tell that you're going down, but you're having too much fun. Okay. Sometimes you can tell you're going down, but you don't want to think about anything else. You start shutting off your mind. Okay. I mean, I'll give you a real example from this semester. We're only about 3 weeks. We just completed 3 weeks in this semester of a student who, and I won't even tell you if you're male or female, but this particular student, in their circle of friends, this is the student who would make everybody pray. Okay. But then this student got involved in a relationship, okay, with a non-Muslim, with an atheist, and whatever haram goes along with that, and this trajectory is essentially what's going on, to the point that this student is saying, I get nightmares, okay, that I'm going to hell. At the same time, the student is saying, but I found my true self. This is the real me. Okay. And I was discussing this with some of my colleagues, and they said, yes, this person found their nafs. They really found their true self. Okay. But the point is, there's still, we have to keep hope that even if you find yourself, even if I find myself going down, 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 crashing, we don't have the privilege of despair. We don't have the privilege of giving up. That even if all I can think of is a small dot of the rahmah of Allah, I have to hold on to that. That at some point, hopefully, I can get myself to go back up again. And always remember that. If you feel, in terms of the condition of your heart, in terms of your role in your community, in terms of your experiences in your family, work, education, everything, if you feel like you're in the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean, and you can't see anything, you still have to convince yourself that there is light somewhere, that the rahmah of Allah is somewhere. We don't have another option, because that was the route, a'udhu billah, of Iblis, right? Why do we call him Iblis? He's the one who has despaired and separated himself from everyone. Okay. But for a lot of us, it's probably something like this, that if you look overall, we're in this particular range. And sometimes we're better, we might do more prayers, sometimes not as many prayers, and sometimes depending upon if we're at work, if we're at home, our Iman seems to fluctuate. But again, the hope is that at the end, that my Iman is the highest that it has ever been in my life. Right? That's the bottom line. The bottom line is whenever it is that I am going to return to Allah, that moment is the highest my Iman has ever been. But let's now explore this. And so this is the simple outline. And we're going to look at life evolution, some ideas on measuring Emaan, some issues of challenges, most of which you're familiar with, some you may not be aware are going on. And then this question of spiritual fitness. Okay. I'm giving all these big terms, but you'll see that they're very, very simple terms. So first, looking at this issue of life evolution. Okay. Can you read that up there? Do we need to read it to you? Fine, I'll read it to you. Okay, so falls and rises and final goal. One point I'd like you to consider is that living in America, you and I, those of us who are older, have already seen how fast things change. That there are topics that are in the mainstream right now. 20 years ago, we couldn't even imagine that they would be anywhere close to the mainstream. And who knows what 20 years from now will be like. And a point I'd like you to consider is that most of us need to rediscover our Emaan every 7 to 10 years. That we need to rediscover what is it that compels us to turn to Allah. You're not going to learn more narrations, you're not going to learn more ayat, but how you are appreciating them will evolve. All of us understand this, that for example, as I was younger, going through the life of the Prophet, may peace be upon him, in my mind he was always someone older. Okay. And then when I started crossing 40, then it occurred to me, now he's my age. Okay. And now I'm at the point where I'm thinking, okay, he's in, as far as my life is concerned, he's in the latter part of Makkah. He hasn't made the hijrah yet. Okay. For some of us in this room, he's made the hijrah. For some of us, he's in the latter part, closer to Uhud, Ahzab, or even his departure. Good. But the point I'm making is that you and I are going to see that in the same way you and I, through learning about the Sirah, it's as though we watch Aisha from birth all the way and beyond. It's like we watch her whole life. It's as though we watch Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, grow his whole life. Okay. But the point to think about is that when you have lived 10 years of life, your understanding of life has changed. Okay. That all of us remember to some degree what life was like when we were 10, and think about how different we look at life at age 20. And those of us who are that old look at how different we look at life at age 30, and then 40 and beyond. And what happens is that what sustained us in Emaan in the previous years may not sustain us as much. So I will have many 20-year-olds or 20-something-year-olds say, I used to be such a good Muslim in junior high, now I just feel like I don't have anything in my heart. Okay. And then I'll hear the same thing from 30-year-olds, I'll hear the same thing from 40-year-olds. And so one big point I'd like you to consider is that your Emaan is something that you need to rediscover every 7 to 10 years. Okay? The package of Islam is exactly the same, but different appreciation will take place. And so, to make the point even further, in terms of resilience, so that is going to evolve. What do I mean by this? When we speak of taqwa as being one of the most important aspects of our relationship with Allah Ta'ala, that we are shielding ourselves. And what are we saying? That whatever it is that hits us in life, loss of wealth, loss of fruits, loss of life, so forth and so on, that with taqwa we are shielding ourselves, turning to Allah, relying upon Allah, that we will be okay. But what you will see, those of you who are young, is that your resilience is going to increase in terms of what life hits you with, and you're going to start peaking around your 40s, maybe into your 50s, Allah knows best, depending upon how much struggle you've been hit with. But then you're going to start noticing that you're actually going to decrease in your resilience. And another way to frame this is the demons we have inside. Another language will be the trauma that we've been hit with. We are stronger and stronger in keeping it on the side. And then, eventually in life, it starts catching up to us. Or another way to frame this is think of what was your relationship, or what is your relationship with your parents. And those aspects of your relationship with your parents that you didn't like, to the point that it has affected your behavior, that is not going to escape you until and unless you do address it and resolve it. Otherwise, it is going to catch up with you. Where am I getting this from? This is my conversations with my colleagues, my Muslim colleagues, who also do a lot of therapy in the community. So think of resilience as something that plateaus, and then it starts actually decreasing. But as we said, our goal is for our Emaan to be continuously rising, our taqwa to also be rising and such. But this is a point to consider in terms of what is ahead of us, in terms of how we deal with what Allah Ta'ala is putting before us. Moving forward. Measuring faith is the one that's highlighted now, right? Yeah. Okay. So 3 things to think about. The condition of your Emaan, which I am making synonymous with this concept, haqiqah. Taqwa, which I'm making synonymous with the condition of your ibadah, your acts of worship. And your deen, synonymous with your relationships, how you conduct your relationships. And we'll explain each of these in a moment. It's easier to do from the third, go back to the first. So when we speak of this entire deen that Allah Ta'ala has sent through the Prophet, may peace be upon him, and through the companions, may Allah Ta'ala be pleased with them. You and I know, and we understand, and we tell everyone else that we have the whole package. That there is not an aspect of life that Islam does not cover. This, we already know, this we already believe. And then when people ask us, why are there no more prophets? We say that everything that we need has now been given to us, and then it is a matter of figuring out how to apply it to our lives. The default being obedience. But when we get into the question of Islamic law, we have issues like zaman and makan, the particulars of your time and place. You might do things differently than you did 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But the point is that we have this whole package. But one point of deen I'd like you to consider is an analysis of your personal relationships. So in terms of depression and anxiety, one big school in our society focuses on your physiological condition. The depression and anxiety is something in your brain, and it must be treated through your brain, whether it's through pharmaceuticals and or with therapy. Okay. And then we have this other school, and sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't, that say that your depression and your anxiety is very related to the condition of your connections, to the condition of your relationships. And a way to think about this is very often our sense of stability comes from the condition or how we feel our home is stable. Our sense of self-esteem often comes from what type of validation did I get, for example, from my father. If I didn't get this sense of validation from my father, I still have the need, I'm going to look for it somewhere else. And I might look for it in unhealthy ways. This nurturing that I should get from my mother, but if for whatever reason I didn't get it or didn't get enough compared to all that I'm getting hit with in society, I still have this need, I'm going to look for it someplace else. Okay. And again, perhaps in unhealthy places. So I want each and every one of us to take a moment and evaluate how you see your primary relationships. And so take a moment just to reflect. When you think of your father, do you think of your father as someone who is or was very generous and very present and nurturing? Or someone who is never happy? Or someone who just left? Likewise, when you think of your mother, what do you think of? And then expand that to how you look at your siblings, depending upon where you are in the order in the family. Are you someone who's always compared to a sibling? Are you the one who's supposed to be the role model? You know, as all of us who are the oldest children, we know that we're the ones that teach the parents how to be parents. Right? And sometimes the parents succeed. But the point being, evaluate that. Then take it a step further. What are your friendships like in terms of the level of trust you have in them? And how many of these people do you have? And then extend it beyond. What is the condition of your relationships? Because the weaker they are, or the fewer of those you have, the less stability you will have. Which then means you're going to search for that elsewhere, and that will also, as you can imagine, affect your Emaan. Now, ideally, what is the point you want to get to? That my Iman is wholeheartedly in Allah Ta'ala, and whatever it is that hits me, I know is coming from Allah Ta'ala, and I just seek to get closer and closer. And in terms of lip service, all of us want to be there, but as you and I know, it is easier said than done to be at that level. So evaluate your relationships. Now take it a step further. You and I are minorities in the society. You know, I don't have to say anything about how much we are marginalized in different ways in the society. The Muslim ban was just expanded this week. And then, how much confidence do you have in your deen? And the easiest way to think about that is, do I keep having to tell myself, this is the truth, this is the way? Or, no, I don't have to think about anything else. My focus isn't getting closer to Allah Ta'ala. Yeah. Meaning, when you're outside of a space like this, how much are you conscious of the fact that people are looking at you, staring at you, judging you? W.E.B. Du Bois, who is one of the big writers about African American thought in history, he says that African Americans have this thing that we call double consciousness. That the common experience for an African American is that they're thinking about themselves, and at the same time they're thinking, what are other people thinking of me? Okay. When you're young, all of us go through that, right? Especially when you're in junior high and high school, you're also wondering, what are people thinking about me at this point? And then as you get older, you may get more concerned about this, but then you reach a point where you just don't care. Right? This is one of the fun things about being a middle-aged Pakistani uncle. It's just, I don't care what people think, right? You know, I'll drive my daughters crazy by saying the most inappropriate things because I enjoy it. But then you get older and you realize no one ever thinks about you, and then you start wishing people did. You know? But what am I saying? Look at your relationships. And ultimately, what are these describing? Not how do you look at these other people, they're describing how do you look at yourself. Moving up, taqwa. This is often the easiest way to measure your iman. And this is simply evaluate the condition and quantity of your prayers. Evaluate the condition and quantity of your fasts. This is the best time of the year to fast because iftar is so early. And so ask yourself if you're taking benefit from this period of time before the clocks change. And then by extension, as you, inshallah, gain wealth, what is the condition of your charity as well? And so what else are we saying? We're hoping that those things each are steadily increasing over the course of our lives. And that is something that is very, very easy to measure. And then now from there, this question of haqiqah, reality. So in the way I said that when you're 10, you look at the world a particular way. And imagine you have a 10-year-old lens looking at the world. In fact, let's stop, let's make this discussion. All of us, I believe, are older than 10. At least in age, maybe not in maturity. Yes, Mancho, thank you for confirmation. Okay, anyone tell us how a 10-year-old, or yourself as a 10-year-old, looked at the world? Meaning, how did it operate? Who wants to share? Somebody. Yeah, suddenly everyone's like looking down or just staring straight at me. Someone raise your hand. It's the easiest question. Yes?
Yeah, so I think it was just on what I was doing day to day.
Okay.
Because I didn't have to plan anything.
Okay.
So I'd go to school, I'd figure out which show I was going to watch on TV, I'd jump on my trampoline, I'd do my homework, and I'd go to bed. I'd eat in between.
Somewhere in there? Okay, so you didn't have any responsibilities except to figure out what show you're going to watch. And then you jump on your trampoline and do your homework perhaps both at the same time, and then you eat somewhere there, and then you go to bed. Yeah?
Yeah.
Does that sound like a 10-year-old? Yeah. All right, someone tell us what a 20-year-old's mind is like. Who wants to share?
I'll go.
Yes. It seems like all the gents are waiting to talk about older life. Yes?
I guess what I think about is that I was about to graduate college. Would I be making money? Would I have insurance? Would I find a job? Would I get married? And where would I live? What would be next in my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that exactly is it. It's now you're facing these big questions. Am I going to have a job? Am I going to have an income? Am I going to have a career? Am I going to have a family? Am I going to receive love from this family member? all these big unknowns, which then, if I can't have trust that there's going to be an answer, then I start developing this anxiety about it. Or if I don't feel as much hope, then I start going downhill about it. Now the number of people in the room is going to get smaller. Anyone want to tell us what a 30-year-old is like? Yes.
Bills, and more bills.
Okay, bills, and more bills. And what is that saying? Now I have all these responsibilities on my shoulder. And now, before the question was, okay, will I have work? Will I have a family? Now, some of those questions have been answered. And now, just to get through the day-to-day, I have to do all these things, which also means, I'm guessing, you're saying that the fantasy aspects of my life, the dream aspects of my life, are now put to the side because I have this day-to-day responsibility. What does that say?
Disconnected.
Good. Anybody want to try 40? MashaAllah. Okay. So we're asking Allah Ta'ala to guide us to be grateful. Okay, absolutely. And what else is taking place by the time we hit 40? You know, my Olympic athletics have never reached me. You know, they're beginning to seem further away. And you know, when you're 10, you can eat all the junk, it never affects you. When you're 20, you still eat all the junk, it never affects you. When you're 30, it starts affecting you that week. When you're 40, it affects you that meal. When you're 50, it affects you before you eat it. Right? Okay. Anything? Oh, inshallah, we'll still work with whatever we have. I mean, you already know what's on the screen. But what is the point that we're making here? Is that you go through this evolution, and the question is, are you seeing reality for what it is? By the time you are in your 40s, you've definitely experienced the death of loved ones. You may have done it by the time you're 10. You may have done it by the time you're 20, maybe 30. But by the time you're 40, that has definitely happened. You've definitely been in the proximity, if not in the middle, of big tragedies. And now you're beginning to face the question, do I have the confidence that life goes on? And so when we speak of haqiqah, what are we saying? That one of the goals of deen, one of the goals of getting closer to Allah, one of the goals of being ready for our meeting with Allah Ta'ala is to see reality for what it really is. Right? This is one of the du'as of the Prophet, may peace be upon him, which was literally, oh Allah, show me the reality of things as they are. What will be the result if I see things for what they really are? Meaning, as a 10-year-old, the toy section is the most important section of all of Orland Park, of all of Bridgeview, right? Orland Park. Okay. But what happens when I start seeing reality for what it is? How would you answer that question? Yes? I'm sorry? It can break your heart. Why? So I had a little trouble hearing part of it. You said not everyone is getting the...
Like the love, you start to realize that your parents aren't like going to be there forever. You start to realize that the world is more broken than
Yeah, that as you get closer and closer to seeing reality for what it is, you begin to see dunya as dunya, not as paradise. And that the rules of dunya are very different than the rules of paradise. Like, what is dunya? This world. When you get deeper into the meaning, it means something that is low. When you get deeper into the meaning, what is it? It is something that when you reach for it, it escapes you. And what else are we saying? That this world is literally a series of tests. And sometimes you're going to be tested with ease, but sometimes you're absolutely going to be tested with struggle. And will justice be served in this dunya? Very often it will not. There are going to be people in this world, many people in this world, who will be victimized and who will not get compensation in this world. There will be people in this world who victimize others and who will not have to pay for it in this world. And so what is also taking place is your appreciation for what Deen offers. And I think I've mentioned this before in previous sessions here. In my limited experience doing this type of work for however many years, the people who do the best in dealing with struggle are Muslims and Christians. Nobody comes close. Atheists are at the bottom. Okay. Anything that makes sense, if we're an atheist, we're saying that when you die, you're nothing but fertilizer. Okay. There's nothing left. But you and I, as Muslims, and also Christians, even though the theology is fundamentally different in some points, we're saying that there is a bigger picture. Okay. And in our deen, we are saying no one is going to escape justice. But the point is, in this world, we start getting to discover how much pain there is in this world. And when you see so much pain, it is easy to forget how much wonder there is still in this world. This was some of the points that I was speaking about at the beginning in terms of my own exploration. When you get exposed to all kinds of darkness, you may even need to remind yourself how much light there still is. That the light still far, far exceeds the darkness. But the point being, again, evaluate yourself how clearly you are looking at this society, how clearly you are looking at life. So, let's talk a little bit about challenges. And this is some point that's probably going to catch your attention. What's happening in terms of challenges right now coming from society? And I want you to think of two things. Number one, what I call the mainstreaming of Islam. And the second is the reform of Islam. Good. Now, ask yourself, would you consider, honestly, meaning you yourself, would you consider Islam to be an American religion? Raise your hand if you say yes. There's no right or wrong answer. Okay, raise your hand if you say yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, raise your hand if you say no. Okay, so a lot of people are abstaining here, just like the Republicans. Okay, so, all right, okay. Islam is now a mainstream American religion. Okay. In terms of politics, we're still a tiny minority. In terms of Hollywood, we're still there, but we're still a tiny minority. But it's essentially a mainstream American religion. And what that means is that the focus that is being preached about Islam is not your relationship with Allah Ta'ala. It is not the quality of your Emaan, it is your identity. So for example, for companies, for university, what is their official symbol of diversity right now? Easy question.
The rainbow flag?
Sorry?
The rainbow flag?
That's one of them, but there's another one. What is it?
Is that a hijabi woman?
A woman in hijab, right? That's the official symbol of diversity. Hey, we have a hijabi here, therefore we're diverse, right? There. Okay. In the past, it may have been someone African American, it might have been someone Latina, it might have been someone in a wheelchair, etc. That is the official symbol right now. But the point to think about, especially for those who are younger, is that those of us who are older remember a life, for example, pre-9/11. We remember a life pre-Ilhan Omar Rashida Tlaib Linda Sarsour. Remember a life where you and I were regarded effectively as public enemy number one. Okay. But now, think about someone who's growing up. On the one hand, America's still at war with Muslim majority societies. But what's being presented here is that these are American figures. And then the push becomes to make Islam an identity rather than a faith. And so it's not a question of how close am I to Allah. It's am I Muslim, am I not? Oh, you're Muslim. In these circles you're welcome, these circles you're not welcome. Done. And so what I'm suggesting for you and I to think about is that that's going to be one of our big challenges, especially over the next decade, the commodification of Islam. That we get excited, rightfully on the one hand, when a business is, a mainstream business, is selling hijabs and such. You know? And why not? No, it's easy to get. But the point being that that starts becoming the default. This has already happened to Christianity in Judaism in the society. That it's become a commodity. And these are questions we can discuss further in the Q&A. The second, the reform of Islam. So, if I study Deen in Morocco at Qadawin, if I study Deen in Cairo at Azhar, if I study Deen at University of Medina, if I study Deen in Deoband, in the particulars I'm going to learn different things, but in the core it's all going to be 100% the same, to the point that it'll be the same books. Okay? Now, if I'm studying Dean at University of Chicago, if I'm studying Dean at Northwestern, or at these big schools, good, I'm learning something very different that is called Islam. And what else is a consequence of that? That in the history of our tradition, this thing that we call Sunni Islam is doing what? We are following and imitating the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Sahaba. You already know all this. But then we're constructing this whole tradition through the text and through the Ummah. But the approach in academia is to study these things through value systems. Okay? These are the people of privilege. These are the dispossessed. And so there's this slightly increasing, but more and more increasing aggressive move for that approach of Islam to get pushed closer and closer to the center. Okay. Now, will it ever become part of Mosque Foundation or OPPC? No, probably not, inshallah. Okay. But the same thing that happened to Reform Judaism, okay, where Orthodox Judaism is here's what the text says, here's what we follow. Reform Judaism is you're Jewish because you feel Jewish. Okay. What percentage of Jews in America are Orthodox? Anyone throw out a number?
1%.
About 20%.
1%.
I mean, in terms of how much of them are good, that Allah knows best, but the general number that's given is about 20%. Meaning 80%, give or take, are Reform. 20% are Orthodox, 80% are Reform. Meaning their Sharia, it's secondary to their identity as Jews. And of course, you and I know Zionism is part of the whole conversation and such. But the point I'm making is that text becomes secondary. This is the same thing that happened with the rise of the Protestant tradition as a pushback against the Catholics. Now, am I saying this is the inevitable result of Islam in America? No, I'm saying there are people who are actively, aggressively, with money, pushing for this. And often when I'm teaching class, Islamic studies, I'll tell students, some of them who are here on the first class, I'll tell them, this is an academic class. You are not learning Deen in this class. You're learning this academic study of Islam. Okay. If you're learning Deen, you're also learning with the intention of practice and such. Okay. But I'll give you a small sample of things that you're already familiar with. One thing that came out of the academic study of Islam for the past 100 years is that the hadith are all fake. Okay. And that you can't rely upon them. The Quran is preserved, but the hadith are all fake. Okay. Eventually, the academic study of Islam in the 1990s started shifting and saying that, well, what Muslims are saying is probably accurate. Okay. But now, what if I'm not a Sunni and I still identify as a Muslim? I'm still not going to want to hear that. Okay. What is being pushed now is that the Quran, you and I know, came in multiple qira'at, right? Different recitations. Also, it came in different ahruf, different words. And this is, we can get into the whole story to explain as an antidote. But what's being pushed by some people who are active and aggressive is that the Quran is not preserved. Think about what that means for people who start believing it. We believe wholeheartedly that the Quran is preserved, word for word, not just words, but even the spaces in between are preserved. Okay. Take it a further step, related to the point you're making about the rainbow and such, that in the value system, that, okay, if you consider yourself Muslim regardless of what your beliefs are, you are Muslim. Okay. Which means what? Sunnah goes out of the picture, the Prophet, peace be upon him, becomes secondary. And so, on the one hand, we have the mainstreaming of Islam to turn it into a commodity, a business market, and on the other hand, we also have this reforming of Islam. But the key point to think about is that this has money behind it. Okay. Now, do I expect that this will affect the people who are sitting in this room on a Saturday evening? Inshallah not, probably not. Okay. Will affect some of your friends or extended people, perhaps. But that is what is taking place. Now, challenges coming from creation. This you already know, and the challenges coming from Allah, this you already know. But to repeat them, the simplest way to think about the challenges coming from creation, and some of you know this, just remember the word nashhadu. Noon, Shin, Ha, Dal. Nashhadu. So, what is Noon? Nafs. Shin, Shaitan. Ha, Hawa, Dal, Dunya. These are your four oppositions, which include some of the things that I just mentioned. Each of these, as you know, could be a full course. But what are we saying here? These challenges, because they are also relentless, will hit you in different ways as you're getting older. Let me help you think of why I keep repeating this point about how we have to re-understand our deen, meaning not in a reformist way, but the point being, let me rephrase it. A common thing that happens with a husband and wife is they start falling out of love. And every 7 or 10 years, they have to rediscover how to love each other. The formula is still the same, but that which drove me and excited me when we were first getting married, that doesn't work. Now we have kids, and we have all these pressures, bills. Now I have to figure out how to do this. And often this gets put to the side because our focus is so much on the children that when they start getting older, then this really starts hitting. Okay? And the same thing happens with your Emaan. And then, of course, what are the tests coming from Allah Ta'ala? This we've also spoken about in past sessions. This you can remember. I won't give you the, it's UATIP. This is the acronym. Yusra, Usra, Istighfar, Da'a, and Qarar. Meaning Allah Ta'ala is sometimes going to test you with ease. Allah Ta'ala is going to test you sometimes with difficulty. Allah Ta'ala is also testing you with forgiveness. Are you seeking forgiveness or not? And Allah Ta'ala is also testing you with obedience, and Allah Ta'ala is also testing you with giving you difficult decisions to make. Now, why am I giving this point that you and I take as obvious? Because your answer is also going to change through time. So, some of you, your strength is going to be in making your prayers. Others, your strength is going to be in making your fasts. But then you're going to reach a point in your prayers where you feel like you're not getting anything out of it. And then you start feeling like you shouldn't do anymore. So, bringing us toward the end, in terms of spiritual fitness, 3 simple points I'd like you to think about. And I'm impressed that, almost all of you are still wide awake. But now, when I'm speaking of this onslaught that is taking place, in the markets as well as in academia, in terms of trying to control the definition of Islam, 3 points to think about. How do you prevent yourself from being hit? How do you keep growing? And how do you redeem yourself? And I have a very, very simple suggestion that all of you, is going to be common sense. You're going to feel like, what, I spent an hour listening to this, but I want you to seriously consider this as a high priority. Connect yourself very closely, if you can, with a teacher. A teacher whose deen, whose character you trust. And try to do that with others of your peers. Even if it's 2 or 3, if you can. We were taught that, the metaphor that Allah Ta'ala's hand is over the Jama'ah. Try very actively and aggressively to connect yourself with a teacher whose deen and character you trust, who will speak truth to you that you don't want to hear but you need to hear. Not in an abusive way, in a way to grow you. And do it with peers with whom you'll be competitive. It's competition in good. And when it's good, you're also helping your peer, because that's also helping you. If you can't find that, then try to do one or the other, depending upon what you can do. Either a teacher, one-on-one, or with peers that you will work together with. And if you can't do that, and your work is on your own, then take the model of the Sahaba, and Allah will be pleased with them, which is literally to take 10 ayahs at a time, and master them. Now notice what I am not saying. Get your knowledge from the internet and from YouTube. Unless you know the curriculum to follow, that will be as much antidote as much poison. Because you'll be given knowledge that you may not know how to use, or you'll be given knowledge that's not of use. But this is my real respectful but urgent suggestion to you if you don't do this already. Okay? Because when we speak of the relationships, the sila, the heart of that is person to person. Okay? When we speak of the acts of worship, your goal is to be competitive with your peer. In the same way you and I know what they share at every single fundraiser, Omar decides one day I'm going to beat Abu Bakr, I'm going to give half of my wealth, and you and I know what he finds out when he arrives. Abu Bakr has already given all of his wealth. Okay? Be competitive with each other in good. Okay? And then in this process, in Emaan, you'll be together as this group to get a better idea of how the world is operating, because you and I know that things are not going to be getting easier in the near future if we didn't even have the marketplace Islam, and if we didn't have the academia version of Islam, all these things that are going on right now. So with that, I hope a few of these points were beneficial, and I thank you for your time. May Allah Ta'ala reward you all. If anyone has any questions, you're also welcome to challenge me on anything as well. I mean, I think everything I said is very straightforward. But the simple point that I'm making is that your deen is something that you will find yourself needing to rediscover and redevelop every 7 or 10 years. All right, with that, wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. May Allah reward you all.